Welcome to the podcast Blind Faith, a podcast where exploring blindness and faith and how they interact. My name is Mark Madavan, and it's my privilege to be the host of this podcast brought to you by Torch Trust for the Blind. In each episode, I'm chatting with a person who has some experience with blindness, and we're just exploring that. So let's dive in again. And my guest today is Kay Morgan Gurr. So welcome, Kay.
It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here. Kay, well, the first question I'm just asking people is what is your experience of faith? What is your journey of with blindness?
It's been a very long journey, but a weird journey as well. Because actually I didn't realise I had a visual impairment until I was a lot older. I just thought it was normal. Wrong diagnosis in my 20s, going into my 30s, and it's only really in the last year I've had a proper diagnosis of various things that are too technical to go into, but made worse by another couple of conditions I have that mean I use a wheelchair as well.
So I'm just curious, just to step back a little bit, is you're saying, because I think many people think that my condition is just normal and we don't realize there's something wrong. But since you're wheelchair bound, so you're dealing with other sort of challenges, but you just thought the sight surprised you in some ways. Then I guess.
Yes, I always thought that text move around on a page. I always thought that the word sort of swapping lines was normal. And I always thought that walking across the floor, for everybody, it looked like water. So everything moving as you walked.
So you've been managing and coping and strategizing around sight loss without realizing that that's actually what you were managing around.
Absolutely.
That's just mental. Sorry. Wow. Because obviously you said you're wheelchair bound, and I'm guessing a lot of times the practicalities are working around that. I also know that you advise a lot on disability because we've had some contact in other situations, and you speak a lot about that. But I am just really intrigued that blindness was never one of the things that you experienced as opposed to just talked about. So you said it was a misdiagnosis.
Yes. They thought it was just normal nystagmus, so where your eyes wobble. But you can't see my eyes wobble. They only wobble when they focus. But what it actually was a tracking disorder. So if your eyes move up and down, they jerk, or they move side to side, they jerk. So hence, if I look at a page with lots of lines on it, all of a sudden some of the words are jumping up 3 lines or jumping down 3 lines, or the words are just swapping over because of the way I track them. So I thought it was normal to miss a word. It's only now I've started listening to audiobooks that I realised how many words I was missing.
So I'm fascinated. So because often with it's my experience and others I've spoken to is blindness is a lack of vision. So I'm guessing you see the full picture, but the picture doesn't stay still.
I have an added complication in that what means I use a wheelchair also affects the muscles at the back of my eyes. So they're constantly contorting what I'm seeing. So if they're relaxed, as they are today, I'm at my normal vision point. So I can see in the distance, but what I see close up is blurred, moving, and horrible, and can make you feel seasick. When it's a bad day and it's actually pulling my eyeballs backwards, I see completely differently. So there are some days where I don't have any central vision. There are some days where I have the central vision but nothing on the sides. Some days it looks like a goldfish bowl. It just depends on how much muscle spasm I'm having.
Wow. So trying to work out how strategies and coping mechanisms is you've got to have like a whole encyclopedia of them, because which day, to know some days you need this and probably not even some days, some hours you need this and some hours you need something different.
Especially in the evening. I can't see much at all in the evening.
Wow.
So I also have another problem where the pupils of my eyes are absolutely tiny. So completely pinprick eye there, and that means I can't see in a gloomy room.
Wow. So I mean, there's a whole multitude of things, and I thought my blindness was complicated, but yours sounds ever changing as well. So I mean, thankfully, it's not a competition about who's more blind, but it's interesting. So you said you're only diagnosed with this and realized in the last year, which really fascinated me because I've known you for several years and I didn't realize this. Um, has it changed how you speak to blind people or other people who are facing conditions, or giving you greater insight, or what has stretched you or surprised you with this new insight and new reality you have with blindness?
I suppose because I was already halfway there with it, actually probably three-quarters of the way there, it hasn't surprised me a lot. Don't think it's actually changed how I speak and how I interact, just because of the training I've had. I used to be a nurse. So how I ever was a nurse with the eyesight I had, I have no idea. Um, which also gives you a good insight as well. So
So it's like you had all the equipment and
yeah,
strategies there, and so it wasn't an emotional. So was it an emotional shock? Was it just another ailment, or is it something else?
yeah. I mean, most disabled people will collect disabilities. So, and I have a few. I think I have moments of grief of what I can't do now, but that's for the whole of my disability, not just my eyesight. So, there was a book I wanted to read. I could not find it in an accessible format. I didn't really want to take it to talk to church to transcribe because I didn't think other people would want to read it. So I've actually had to struggle to read it in an app that isn't very accessible. And the other issue I haven't mentioned yet is that actually it physically hurts to try and read text because it's pulling on the muscles. So it can be agony sometimes to read.
There's two things I want to just pursue. One is you just mentioned Torch Trust. You didn't want to ask them to change it to a media that you can connect, because that's what they do, don't they? They
They do.
with Christian books is you can actually call them up and say, can I need this in this format, large print, braille, whatever, and they really seek to do that, which is brilliant. So there's a little plug for them if you want to get a Christian book to beat to Torch Trust. That's really great. I'm really intrigued by something you said just a couple of moments ago, that you have moments of grief. Because I think often when people consider blindness, you're saying it's just a heavy burden. It's an ongoing grief, and there is some of that, I guess. But you said moments. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Um, I'm quite a cheerful person. I'm known for having a smile all the time, to the point that even when I'm training, people say I'm more like the smiling assassin because I can give really harsh information but do it with a smile. And I've always had joy. But there's just moments that, you're carrying on, you're doing something, and then there's something you can't do. And I've got to ask somebody else to step in and help. And it's just that moment of, "Oh, I just want to be able to do that myself. And I can't."
I think many people wrestling with blindness and other disabilities have those moments, and I think in those moments it's really interesting. You labeled it as it's a grief moment, and it's okay. It's okay to say it's a grief. I really, that annoys me, or I'm frustrated with that. But how do you stop yourself getting stuck there? To fall into the, I mean, it's always good to have a bit of a wallow and woe is me. That's all right to do that. The little hippo moment in mud and go woe is me. But how do you stop yourself getting stuck there?
Sometimes it's not easy. Um, I have a glorious husband who just makes me laugh, and he is amazing. But sometimes I just have to get to that point. I mean, what I do is I plug myself into worship music because that is my connection point spiritually. And that starts to lift me. And then I can get to the point where I want to pray. Because sometimes that wallow point of the grief, I don't want to talk to God whatsoever. I just want to sit there and wallow. But you listen to the worship music, and quite often verses from the Bible will come to mind. And then I will talk to God and go, right, okay, I'm ready now to talk to you.
That's really helpful, because I want to talk about faith in a second, but what what I just want to just underline really is to say that you have those moments of grief, and you hang around those, and you're known as a smiling assassin, if you want, whichever title you want. But I think some people they say, "Oh, you cope so well and you so well," and just to hear that sometimes you're going, "This sucks," I think that's actually quite encouraging at times. Because we can fool ourselves to think, "I gotta be happy all the time and trust Jesus and put some worship music on." But would you say it's legitimate to have times where you're going, "This is tough?"
It's healthy,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah,
You can't go through life not grieving. If you don't grieve, it really is not healthy. And to quote the phrase that everybody's actually saying at the moment, it's okay not to be okay.
yeah.
Sometimes I've said to Steve, actually, when he's sort of jollying me on, I just need a moment to grieve. Just, walk away from me if you want to, but I just need that moment.
I think this is really important, and I think 'cause sometimes in our coping with our blindness or disability is that we are putting on a mask or a face for other people because we don't, we're trying to help them, but sometimes we have to say, wait a minute, this is tough. And you said you put worship music on, and you send God to Coventry a little bit and don't speak with him until you sort of get your brain a little bit more ordered. So faith is clearly a real part of your life. So how does faith and the good news of Jesus, how does that fit in to your disability and to your blindness? And how does that all work?
Um, I have to step back a little bit just to say that there are so many elements in my life that actually feed into this. Um, I had absolutely pants childhood, and that is where I got to know God as Father and actually have Him step into my life and say how much He cared and that He was going to stand with me through all of that awful time. And that has actually told me how trustworthy God is, which means I come to at different points in my life where my disability has got worse or got more painful, that I know I can actually trust Him with my life. And I know He grieves for it with me. So I'm not in my own in that grief. He's a loving, fatherly God.
I think that's really powerful again, because I think often we have that, well, why doesn't he heal me? But actually you're saying there's a real richness in knowing that he grieves with us, and that he, I mean, Psalm 23 is, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Why? Because you are with me. And I find that a real encouragement and a real comfort. I mean, I'd love for the badness and the tough to go away, but actually God says, no, I'm weeping with you, which is a side of God that I think some people miss, or sometimes we don't present it that way. We have this very clean cut view of God, and God goes, "No, I'm a God who steps into the messiness and the hurt, and I'm with you." Which I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm sort of hearing that's what you're saying, and I know that's my experience as well.
Yeah, I sometimes I think we come across with the triumphal side of faith more than we do with the person that shows God's grace minute by minute in pain, in grief, in anything. And that is as amazing as the triumphant stories as well.
And actually, that's an amazing display of faith as well, because often we think we link triumph to faith and look at what faith does. But actually, in hearing your story and other people's stories, is that day by day when you're facing the challenges, is you're going, yep, but he's faithful and I trust him
Yes.
and I know him. And so often that's I think a stronger faith and a blazing faith that we can quickly skim over, because it's not all neat and tidy, but it's actually real gritty and real. And I think many people can relate to, not just in disability or blindness, but in lots of areas of life. Because life isn't always sunshine and roses, is it? And that's really fascinating. If you were to be able to go back in time and speak to the late teens or early teen K, early 20s K, what piece of advice would you give now? What wisdom do you have now that you're going, you need to hear this? Uh, I'm curious of what you'd tell your younger self.
I think the first thing I'd say is you can, because I was getting a lot of people telling me I couldn't. And that happens to a lot of disabled people. And I wasn't visibly disabled in those days. But I still had people saying, oh no, you're not going to be able to do that now. And the other thing is that God will remain faithful.
Because I think that you can thing is because I think often confidence is one thing we wrestle with a lot. Is, well, can I do that? Can't I do that? And if people are always telling you that, that can really mess you up a little bit. So,
Yeah.
but I know that you've done a lot of stuff with your husband Steve as well, and done training, and you've traveled, and despite the challenges you face, is you still step out and do incredible things. Because there is that encouragement, you can do this, but then I think often people say, yeah, but how do I do that? How would you answer if you told your younger self you can, and then you said back to
Mm.
yourself, yeah, but older Kay, but how do I do that?
Um, I mean, with my story, I had a moment actually at Spring Harvest, um, where God said to me, "Where I want you to be, I will always keep you well enough to do the task." And I've had little promises like that since I was 9 years old. First of all, that God had got something for me to do. He was preparing me for that something. And then, this is what I want you to do. And that's when I was going through the diagnosis process that God said, this is what I want you to do. And I said, I can't do it unless you make me well enough to do it. So he didn't say, I'm going to cure you. He healed me, but he didn't cure me. So I came to the point that, yes, actually, I lack a lot of confidence, and I still do. I'm an introvert. Um, but that promise of you will always be well enough to do it, that I received when I was about 24, I think. If I'd have known that when I was younger, that would have been really helpful. But God's timing is perfect, and it was right at that moment.
That's great, because I mean, for those listeners who don't know, Spring Harvest is a really big Christian conference that happens once a year, which Kay is actually the advisor on for those. How do we interact, and how do we care for and lovingly journey with those with disabilities and other restrictions? And because I know that Torch Trust, they actually do advise and they help churches as well. Because sometimes we want to help and we just don't know how to help. And Kay is the expert who comes in. But what I just love is that despite being the person who's telling and helping people to do this better, is you're still hearing the whisper of God, and often God says just little comments like, my strength is going to be enough for you, or I'll ensure that you actually have what you need. And those little comments that you're holding on to, I hold on to as well. Little words that God has said to me that to some people sounds like just a little phrase, but in our lives, in my life, you're going, that is so valuable. And I really appreciate when God says that. Okay, I know just before we come to an end, is I know that you have some links with Torch Trust for the Blind, and you help, and you're nudging them and helping probably more the public to realize that there's a lot of good resources there. What are you excited about with what's happening at Torch Trust for the Blind?
Just the way they're growing and moving and always looking for the next thing, what is actually needed, and the willingness to change where change is needed. Not that they need to do much change. And just shouting out, I think in the last week I've sent 3 emails to people with sight loss and said, have you connected with Torch yet? And they hadn't. So there we go. Some more work for transcribing more books.
But that's great. I think it's one of the things that I found, and other guests have said, it's that support of community, and we're in this together, because it's trying to break that isolation. It's just your problem to deal with. Is we're in this together, and Torch Trust helps with that, as other Christians can. And I really appreciate, Kay, that you really help and advocate for so many other people as well. And just thanks for sharing a bit of your story, and continue to just be the amazing person you are. And don't be a smiling assassin. Just be the smiler who just builds up. So that winds up this episode of Blind Faith. Thanks for joining us, and hope we'll see you next time.
If you are living with sight loss or support someone who is, then Torch is here for you. Get in touch at torchtrust.org.